All right.
Okay. How are you, Joe?
Hi, Bede. I'm well, thanks.
Good. Now we're
Looking
gonna,
forward to more Dayananda.
yeah. Well, we're gonna, like, I don't really know a lot about Hinduism or Vedic psychology. I only know the psychology or the Hinduism as unfolded by Swami Dayananda. So I'm not a religious scholar at all. But
Mm.
what I found very interesting was because of my background, I was very interested in what I called, and I used to joke about this with Swamiji about Dayananda psychology. And what I mean by that is that it's a bit of a joke because it's a psychology that in the light of this psychology you can understand every aspect of human existence. It covers it entirely. And so it gives you a like a frame of reference or a way of looking at your life uh, that's incredibly useful because it frees
So
you
it's a very
from
deep psychology,
it's a
a
deep
very
psychology.
deep psychology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And what Dayananda said is that the psychology of the Gita is the psychology of desire. And I got quite excited about that when I heard that because I like psychodynamic theory. And I knew that the human heart is moved,
Yeah.
the very movement of the heart does constitute my life. If I'm angry and I'm being moved by anger, that's going to that is going to be expressed as a cognition. It's going to be expressed as actions. It's going to be expressed everything. So we human beings are never going to be free of being moved. It's a question of what we're moved by. So we can never be free of being moved. Okay.
So when you say be moved by, that suggests that there's something sitting behind what I do, what I want,
Yep. Yep.
that drives it.
That what we're looking at is what moves us as human beings. And the Vedic
Mm.
psychology, as outlined by Swami Dayananda, is extremely clear on this, and that there are four strivings or four dynamic movements that can come alive in a human being. Well, they're not. No, 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 they're always there, and they are moving us. Okay, which we will explain.
Right. So
Well,
they're not strivings in the sense of they're not strivings in the sense of that's what you go for. It's a striving in the sense of that's what motivates us or that's what drives us.
yes. For example, so let's just have it. What we'll do is we'll
Mhm.
look at the first striving, which we're all familiar with, in order to understand the structure of what it is to be moved and how it affects us. And then we'll go on further. So the first thing is every human being that you know is moved by the movement of wanting to be secure,
Yep.
free from physical harm, free from discomfort, wanting to be secure. Now, this is an extremely important and useful uh, it's a movement that's abidingly present. It doesn't just suddenly turn on or so. It's I'm constituted by it. It actually is constantly moving me. So when I'm driving a car, I don't drive on the other side of the road. In fact, if I found myself suddenly on the wrong side of the road, I'd get an urge to move back to the right side of the road. Now that's very helpful, isn't it? The fact that I've got an inbuilt concern about my physical security. Because when
Yeah,
I
that helps us too, by the way, on the road. Yeah.
Yeah, and what about when you're getting older? So you start saving money and all of this sort of stuff, because when you get older, you may need it. You may not be able to earn. So you have an urge to earn money, which is a very good and helpful urge, isn't it? Imagine,
Hmm.
imagine if a bus was coming towards you and you had to go, now let me think, what would be a good choice here? Will I move out of the way when it's coming or won't I? Or will it, well, what's going to happen is I'm going to see a bus, it's coming towards me, and then I'm going to have this tremendous urge to jump out of the way. And you could say, well, you've chosen it.
There'd be a lot less people, yes. There would be less people in the world.
Yeah, that's right. So, um,
And they'd all be bus drivers.
yeah, yeah. When people take vitamins or change their diet or get fitter, very good things in themselves, because but the thing is, they will never find absolute security there, but there is a desire for relative security. It's related to our life situation. So we make sure that if we're sick, we go to bed. We know that's a good idea to go to bed. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if we are approaching an edge of a cliff and we suddenly go, oh, better watch it. Suddenly we're filled with this urge to back off. So all of these, this we're not actually aware of the urge for security per se, but it manifests in very specific situations. So, for example, if someone starts to run towards you with an axe, tell me something. Will you engage in a thinking process? Will I choose to do this or that? Or will you suddenly just find yourself filled with the urge to run? Your body will be charged up with adrenaline so you can run fast. Would that be happening?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, you're
And
not.
run away from the X-Man, yeah.
Yeah, you can't get away from it. You can't go, I will just see. Imagine this is the problem with drug addicts. They get so wrapped up in their addiction that the ordinary concerns for security, objective security goes out the window, and a subjective security of feeling good inside, still the desire for security, but it doesn't bring about security. It brings about a feeling of security, but it's not objective. All right. So, and like what we've said before, so this drive, this movement, our cognition, the way we see anything at any one moment, is always in the context of a striving. It doesn't happen by itself. You don't just suddenly have a thought.
Sure.
Okay, so it's very, very good to have a striving for relative security. Can you see that?
Definitely.
We're
It's
gonna get
preservation.
yeah, we're gonna talk about the distortions of it in a minute, but so we have a desire to be secure, and because of this, we have cognitions of that might not be quite good to do that. If I keep on eating just ice cream every day, I'm going to get fatter and fatter, and I might get a heart attack. Probably not a good idea. So when I'm thinking about it, I'm being moved, and that thinking is a function of that striving. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a function of so that's the first striving, the striving for security.
Yep.
All right.
So that also includes staying alive, obviously.
Yeah, you're not going. Yeah, you can't get away from striving. Yeah,
any drive.
Yeah, yeah. The reason I'm doing this particular person wrote me an email about this, and thought that I was saying you should give up the strivings. You can't give up strivings. You can't give up strivings. Okay.
Well, maybe because it could easily be mistaken for striving in the sense of I'm making a decision to pursue something, right? But you're not talking about that. You're talking about a much deeper.
I'm talking about the underlying psychodynamics, the underlying movement of the desire for security. But we're never aware of that desire for security as such. We just find ourselves going, I better actually reduce the amount of carbohydrates that I have, otherwise I'm going to balloon out. Right? So as far as we're concerned, we're just thinking. I'm just thinking. No, I'm thinking in the context of something. There's no such thing as a cognition that is context free. You know how I've said to you that context determines meaning?
Yep.
So in any one moment.
So it's not only the context. So a striving is not only the context of our thinking, it also of our feeling and doing.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. This is why, unless there's a change in what moves us as human beings, there is no change. There's modification, right? But there's no change. So
Yeah.
that's the first striving. Then we have a striving, and you can see at the moment, I just want to see, can you see how, in order for me to negotiate my human life, having that striving is a very good thing. It makes
Yeah.
me take care of myself. It makes me take care of my children and my wife and all that stuff and the people around me. Okay? Okay? Avoidance
Yeah.
of harm. All right? So it's a very
Yeah.
useful and good striving, and we don't want to get rid of it. That's crazy, this idea, I don't want to have desires. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay? And because the other thing is, Swami Dayananda says that when we're talking about desires in the Gita, in this sense, it is the binding desires that we're dealing with, not desires for security. It's the desires that
Right.
that misdirect us, that screw us up. So
Yeah.
we've got the desire for the security. The next striving we have is a very interesting one. It's the striving for pleasure. We're all familiar with this one. So when you're outside and it's winter and you're really cold, what are you going to get an urge? If you're cold, what's going to happen? What's the urge going to be?
Towards warmth.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Is it good having nice walks in the park? I say, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to go for a nice walk in the park because I enjoy it.
Sure.
See, Swami Dayananda was not against the striving for pleasure. He even said, keeps us in good humor.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so the association with good friends, that is pleasurable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right now, if I didn't have the striving for pleasure and suddenly I was freezing cold, if I didn't have that striving, then I'd be negligent and I might catch cold or I might die of exposure.
Yeah.
If I put my hand on a hot stove, what's going to happen?
Huh. Yeah. Yeah. You're going to yell out
So
because it's going to hurt.
it's extremely useful, isn't it? There's people who've got a disease where they've got no tactile feeling, and they really damage themselves. Like, we don't even know that we're avoiding all of the time bumping into things and all of this sort of stuff. We're avoiding pain and pursuing pleasure.
Yeah.
When have you ever want to think, oh, I'd like a cup of coffee, have a nice cup of coffee?
Sure. Yeah. I think that all the time, nearly all day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that might be another issue, but but you can see that if you're with certain people and the experience is very unpleasant, it's unpleasant, it's not pleasurable, it tells you maybe I should get out of here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's a very good thing, the striving for pleasure and the avoidance of pain.
So the striving for pleasure and avoidance of pain are the same thing. It
Yeah,
relates pretty closely to security, doesn't it? Staying alive.
yeah. But one is to
Uh,
do with protection, like in terms of physical security and well-being, and the other is
mm,
pleasure and avoidance of pain.
yeah.
Okay, and like and so this desire for pleasure and avoidance of pain moves me, and so it should, and we're not trying to get rid of it. Some wacky spiritual people think that, oh, you shouldn't go for pleasure and you should just give up all desire and stuff like that. You cannot give up desire.
No, no.
You might
More
desire
coffee.
something different, that's true, but you cannot give up desire. You cannot give up desiring.
Hmm.
All right.
Yeah.
And then so the same way with pleasure, we're looking at the world and we're going, yeah, this is pleasurable. I quite like this. I'll keep this going. I don't like that. I don't. I'll move away from that. Very useful.
Hmm.
Very, very useful. Now, next thing is that we have a striving. So no, actually, before I go in there, I'll go now. Can you see how when these strivings help us negotiate the objective world. They're highly useful.
The world of objects, yes.
Yeah, the world that we're facing.
Helps me avoid stuff and deal with
Yep.
stuff in a safe and pleasant way.
Yeah, and it helps me, look after my physical security, because we all need food, clothing, and shelter. That's something we need, and we need to work for it. For example, do you know what I mean? The problem is, and notice how, our senses, for example, are always ordered towards outward, out to connect with objects other than ourselves. Have you noticed that? So when you hear, hearing isn't just, oh, it's just me and my sense of hearing. Hearing is related to an object outside me. Seeing is. Even the strivings for pleasure, pain, and pleasure are related to what's outside of me.
Yeah.
All right? The problem is, have you noticed, though, that human beings can become egocentric?
Really?
Hard to imagine. Now,
yes, of course I have.
yes. You see, what we know is that our hearts can become full of the desire for things like social approval, status, power, various wanting to have certain types of experiences so I can feel secure. I'm still being moved by security. Do you know what I mean? Like, when people lie,
it's sort of psychological security.
It's psychological security. Trying to be psychologically secure is stupid. It never works, because it's just not possible. But what happens is, instead of being preoccupied with the world in front of us, we become egocentric. We're full of the love of ourselves, protecting ourselves as a psychological person, right? So when we're fearing rejection, for example, or inordinately needing a desire for approval, which is a common binding desire in our culture, or it's every culture, it's a common binding desire. That is not going to help me live objectively in the world, but it will force me to see the world. I'll be seeing the world not in the light of the striving of security. I'll be seeing the world in the light of self-security. And we call this love of self, don't we?
Yeah, okay. So the previous ones you dealt with, they're mainly like keeping my body going, keeping my life, it's very basic. Whereas this is starting to be something that I feel I have, whether that's true or not true, or real or not real. I feel I need to promote it and defend it.
Absolutely. So I've got an idea of myself.
To be flatter than...
I've got an idea of myself that I need to promote and defend. It's still the desire for pleasure and security. Like, it's highly pleasurable to get social approval. We're built that way. And there's nothing wrong with having pleasure, but receiving, when it's a pleasant experience to receive social approval. But when I desire it as a means to become more secure, right? I'm not going now for just objective security. I am striving for self-security.
Yeah, when you listen to things like gossip, it often comes down to, I wasn't recognized for who I think I am kind of talk, right?
All of this stuff, yes. All of this stuff. Because and what happens is, we've discussed in previous talks, this binding desires where we want to look, we want social approval, we want power, we want status, or whatever. Like, for example, when someone puts you down, what does that mean? It means that they have put down a concept of yourself that you like and that you want to be seen in a certain way by others. And when they're not, you feel deeply insecure.
And that sense of self becomes offended, starts reacting.
It's still a desire for security. Except that desire, it's very helpful to have a desire for objective security. Subjective security sucks. It doesn't exist because it's always undergoing assault, because some people will not necessarily see me as I want to be seen. And so this inordinate desire to be a good look in our own eyes and the eyes of other people, that does not relate us to life, to the world we live in. It doesn't bring us into relationship with the world that we live in. It makes us self-involved.
Right.
And the basis of the problem with this, with binding desires, is it's the mother of emotional reactivity.
Yeah, I could see that.
Okay. And Dayananda says that most adults have an emotional age of a 6-year-old. That's what he meant.
All
right.
Yeah.
So what happens is that I love myself, I love the world, and that is what moves me. My love of myself and the love of the world. Love of the world being I want certain types of experiences which I believe will make me secure and happy. Right? I want certain types of experiences so I can feel secure and happy as a person. Right? And this is universal. This is universal.
Yeah.
These are strivings, they're natural strivings that every human being has. Right? Now,
Get that?
Now we have 2 other strivings. And the next 2 other, what we could call it in the particular, if we were talking in the West, these are higher strivings. Right?
Right, okay.
You see, we have a striving for freedom. Do you know what I mean? Like to live in harmony. We have a striving to live in harmony. Okay?
Yep.
And it's not possible to live in harmony without freedom, relative freedom. So we've got a striving to live in harmony and to not harm other people or harm ourselves. Right? And in this striving, it's only when this striving starts to come alive in us as a dynamic force do we really begin to change. And this is the striving for Dharma. To live a harmonious, righteous life. To live in the relative world in a way that's harmonious and helpful.
Yep.
Now, when we have, for example, this is the difference. What happens is, let's say that I suddenly get pissed off with you and I say, Joe, you're just an SOB. I can't stand you. I lose my temper with you. And then suddenly something comes in and goes, you know, you're not being kind, and you suddenly feel a kind of a regret that you talked that way. You ever had that experience?
Absolutely, yes.
Right. So that's interesting, isn't it? So what happens is, when you are totally self-involved and wanting something and you're not getting it and you're angry, it feels so right, doesn't it? It feels right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But suddenly you have this cognition that comes in and goes, Bede, you're not acting in a way that's right. Isn't that amazing? So when this striving to live rightly, to live in harmony with the world in a way that's not harmful to yourself and other people, Swami Dayananda called this the striving of Dharma. And this is so important because, you know how we said that the whole of the teaching is about freedom? Being free while living? That freedom begins to be lived, relatively speaking. So the first thing in the light of Dharma, we discover relative freedom, not absolute freedom, right? But relative freedom, in the sense that if your behavior is determining how I act, in other words, okay, I lost my temper because Joe did this. Am I being free?
Yeah.
Am I being free?
No.
No, I'm being
No.
determined. So when we're caught up in emotional reactivity, which can be losing temper with someone, or knowing, I should do this, but I'm not going to do it. I should. This would be good for me to do, but I don't really want to do it right now. They're all emotional reactions. I don't want to do it right now because something else is more important than doing what would be the right thing. You see?
Yeah. So if we strive for a harmony to live with the good,
Yeah.
initially my sense of what is good is that which is pleasurable, agreeable, avoids pain,
Feel,
helps me
mate,
to
yeah, feeling
be
good.
approved. So
What
there
makes
is a
you feel
different
good?
sense of,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So
What
so
makes
there's a
you?
different sense of good than you're talking about. With Dharma is a higher standard of good, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, the thing is, I think it's good for me to feel good about myself and to have pleasure and to feel secure. So I pursue those things. In other words, I can't help but pursue those things. I cannot help to pursue. That's why Dayananda says, don't try and moralize with people. It's not going to work until they see the value of the
Mm.
value, and that value becomes valuable to them. They're not going to be moved by Dharma.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
So he was quite clear on that. You can read as many self-help books as you like, do as much psychotherapy as you like, or whatever. But unless you discover the value of living a dharmic life, and that's our introduction to freedom. Because if I if if what's determining my cognition, I'm looking at what's happening in my life in the light of Dharma,
Yeah.
and that light is determining how I see and how I act,
Yeah.
can you see how that's freedom practically?
Definitely. Yeah.
Right? So the thing is that we can be, if we can say, oh, yeah, I want moksha, I want freedom, I want absolute freedom. Well, what did he do? Done. He says that you cannot appreciate total freedom unless you appreciate relative freedom. You can't
So I think
have,
a lot of people would demand it as a right almost without looking at their own strivings.
yeah. See,
Mm.
it's all very well saying I want, total freedom, but do we? So the thing is this: do I really want freedom? You've said something I don't like, and I feel like I want to say something nasty back. Right now, I'm under the sway of egocentricity. I'm not looking at it in the light of Dharma, because in the light of Dharma, I want to avoid all harmful acts. Because so the light of Dharma leads me into a life of genuine relative freedom, because what's going to determine my actions is it right or is it wrong? And I'm in the light of Dharma, I'm going to be seeing my conduct, and I'm going to be seeing, that conduct is wrong. I will correct it and make it right. So, and when I do, I come into harmony with the situation. Now I'm living in it now I am not being determined by emotional reactivity. I'm being determined by what's happening in front of me and responding in the best possible way, aren't I?
Yeah.
And I've got a striving to not to live it in a non-harmful way in the world. That's why we have those feelings of regret and remorse. We go, oh, that wasn't good. I don't like that. So when you suddenly feel remorse and you go, my God, I hate it when I act that way. It's good hating it when you act stupidly, to hate it. That's incredibly harmful. That is not self-condemnation. Self-condemnation is from the lower level. I've got a nice picture of myself as a lovely, warm, loving person that I love to see myself in that way. You said something to me, I'm now angry, and I go, I'm not, I hate that. And then I'm self-condemning. It's because I haven't lived up to a picture of myself that I love.
Yeah, and because I haven't gotten what I want.
and I
and I
haven't
could
done
have
what I
done
want.
and I could have done it differently, and I hate myself over letting
Yeah,
that opportunity go.
yeah. I need to get
Mm.
my what I want in better ways. Yeah. So I need to get
Yeah,
love and approval in a better way. So I go to a psychologist. He says, "Okay, Bede, what you got to do is you got to understand the social situation, and you got to, you got to, you know, you know, you know, kind of listen
take
and
turns,
and take
let them
turns
talk.
and do all of this stuff, and then people will like you, and then when they like you, your self-esteem will go up. And well, that sounds very good, but that's nothing to do with living a life of dharma,
Right,
because I'm
right.
still enslaved to wanting praise and approval.
So would you use the word conscience in this too?
Yeah,
Does that have a place?
yeah, yes, it
Mm.
does. You see, the difference is at the lower levels, it's the conscience that Freud talked about, your internal conditioning. You know what I mean? So when you think you've been naughty, you start become self-hating, right?
Yeah, that could
It's
be a trained kind of conscience, isn't it?
it's a
Which
well,
I
it's a
don't think is.
yeah. I wouldn't call it conscience, but it's a trained. Freud is outlined it quite well. Is that we internalize the shoulds and the oughts of how we should act from our parents, and when we live by them, we feel I'm good. I'm now a good little boy, a good little girl, and when I'm bad, I'm a bad little boy. I'm a bad girl, right? That's not that's the action of this internal censor. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's not genuine conscience. It's not it's I mean it's quite useful. I mean in forming society and all of that stuff, that mechanism is very important, because I remember when I was a kid, you could put money in the milk in the letterbox and no one would steal it, right? You couldn't do
yeah.
that now. So we're not saying that there
No,
hasn't.
because nobody leaves money in the letterbox anymore, so you can't steal it.
No, exactly, yeah, that's right, yeah. but
Yeah,
but the difference between self-hatred and the recognition that I've done something wrong is when I've recognized something is wrong in the light of Dharma, I'll now have an urge to correct my behavior and conduct. When I'm
yeah,
being self-hating, I don't have an urge to correct my conduct. Does that
true.
make sense? So,
I can see that.
so
I can
through the
see that.
teaching, through the teaching, you can see the value of a life of Dharma, because it takes you beyond love of self and love of the world. Because what you're
So there are
focused.
two types of reasons for changing your conduct. One is that if I am what other people would consider good, I get rewards, or I get
Yep,
more of what I want.
yep,
If I'm bad, I get punished or ostracized and left alone or criticized, which I
yeah,
don't want. But there's a deeper reason for it, which is what you're talking about now.
yeah. When I'm feeling bad, that's external. It's just simply, it's still in the context of my egoism, my love of
Yeah,
self and love of the world. But this, but when you get to Dharma, in our Western tradition, we would call this love of neighbor.
right. Yeah,
We basically have a desire to be helpful and caring, not
yeah,
because not to become a good person, but to
yeah,
live a harmonious, constructive, helpful life for itself.
yeah, right.
So we clear on that so far?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good distinction. Yeah, yeah.
All
And
right.
I think it needs to be articulated because it doesn't, I don't know if it comes natural to people, but we're so preoccupied with that first type of striving that we forget that there might be another.
That's why we have to get real serious about Dharma, because you see, if let's say we get angry, you see, our heart, the strivings of our heart are constantly being revealed particularly when they get frustrated, right? So what happens is you do something I don't want, and then I attack you, or I criticize you, or anything like that. Now, I can say to myself, okay, I'm interested in the spiritual life. There's no spiritual life without Dharma. Right?
Hmm.
So, but I can't let myself off the hook when I'm being hateful, or when I'm not doing what I need to do. It's like what St. Paul said, the good that I would do, I don't, and the evil that I wouldn't do, I do.
Yeah.
It's actually a true thing. And
Yeah.
in the Vedic tradition, they got a similar saying.
Right. Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So we need to grow out of our egocentricity and love of the world, and love of ourselves and love of the world. We need to grow out of that. We cannot.
Mm-hmm.
You can't fix it at the same level. So the same level of the problem, you cannot. That's why psychology doesn't work, because it doesn't. You can change people's behavior so that they can find better and better ways to gratify their binding desires. That's true.
Yeah.
But you're not dealing with that is not the light of Dharma opening up in you. And this is why Swami Dayananda, as we've done in the previous talk, talks about the value of values. The only reason that we will live a life of Dharma is if it becomes valuable to us. And if it becomes valuable to us, and the value of the value becomes valuable, now I'm moved by Dharma. So that means that I might say, for example, I might notice that I'm bragging and I go, that's not good. I won't do it. Okay. So that's a good idea, because that's being dharmic. In other words, you're not feeding the egocentricity, but you're moving away from it. So, for example, I'm angry at you and I want to say something horrible to you to pay you back, right? Mm-hmm. Or I'm maybe scared to pay you back directly, so I talk to a friend of yours and tell that friend of yours what an SOB you are.
Yeah, doing it indirectly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in other words, I'm seeking to deprive you of the friendship of others, which is hostile, right? So, human beings, because of their cravings, can't help but be hostile. Any form of hostility, when you're riddled with upset and hostility and condemning and hateful, you are caught in something. You're caught in emotional reactivity. And because that emotional reactivity is going to determine how you see and act, you might justify it, but it is not living a life of Dharma, and it's being simply living a life of a robot. Because they did that, I'm feeling that, and because I'm feeling that, I act that way. There's no freedom in that. The only thing that frees me at the beginning is learning to live a life of Dharma. But you're not going to learn to live a life of Dharma if you think, well, I know how to live a life of Dharma already. I'm a pretty good person, right? It's nothing to do with being a good person. It is relating to the world in a good way.
Right.
So it is Dharma is how you relate. A life of Dharma will put you in the world as it is. Yeah. So you can see it, right? Because you're interested. What's happening here? What is needed here? What do I need to do here that would be a right and helpful and constructive thing? And then I might at the beginning know what would be constructive and don't do it. But that's a beginning. But unless I do it, I can't come into harmony with life.
Yeah.
And what Dayananda says is that we need to live a life of Dharma because we can then become relatively peaceful. He thought this was extremely important, because if you become relatively peaceful, that is the only way you can then appreciate a peace that is absolute. But you need the relative first. If you want to discover what freedom is, you have to know what freedom is relatively before you know it in an absolute sense.
Yeah, I've always had the sense that freedom is generally relative anyway, because can we really be totally free? We can't be unless we're fully conscious and almost the equivalent of God.
Well, this is the good news that Vedanta says. For Vedanta, God itself is freedom. The life, light, and fullness that is God is freedom, and that freedom is absolute. Now, admittedly, it's not part of the relative. What you can't. This is the fourth striving: the longing for God, the longing for the absolute good. you can't know God as an object, but you can come to an appreciation. The only way you can know God is when you are being the light, when the life that you are being is the life that is, life, light, and fullness that is God. And that is absolute. And that's what Vedanta calls non-dual knowledge. It's not I know that. We can't know God as an object away from ourselves, but we can appreciate our life, our life as the life, light, and fullness that is God. So we can appreciate our life, that our real life is that. And then that's absolute freedom. But
right.
it's not something I get.
Makes sense.
It's not, you see, this is the fourth striving. We have a longing for the ultimate good. We have a longing for God. And this is what makes us read spiritual books. This is, we wonder, is there such a thing as eternal life? A life that is never destroyed, a life that doesn't come and go, a life that doesn't have hatred in it and fear and sickness and death and all of this sort of stuff. Is there such a life? This is a very important question.
Yeah.
And so everyone has a striving or a longing for perfection. But what Swami Dayananda says is you're not going to, unless my mind can be relatively peaceful, I will never be able to come to the appreciation of peace itself.
Sure.
But we have to see, when we look at things like freedom, when we look at the absolute things, is that once we understand that God itself is freedom, the life, light, and fullness that is God is freedom. And when we're appreciating our life as that freedom, that is absolute freedom. That doesn't mean to say that as a mind, sense, body complex, I become absolutely perfect. That's ridiculous. But it's not my achievement. How can you achieve God?
No, you have to be given it, don't you? The qualities can only be shared from that ultimate being. It can't be borrowed or cut off, a piece cut off that can be mine, sort of thing.
Yeah. Only when you are being the life, light, and fullness that is God do you appreciate what God is. It's only through living God's life as your life is there such a thing as non-dual knowledge.
Yeah, so we have to strive to live in harmony with it. Then those qualities and that freedom can be shared with us.
Well, again, it's not like I give you that. I mean, no, because our sense of identity is normally locked in as a human being living in the world of space and time. Is that true?
Yeah.
And we tend to take our life to be the things that happen to us and the thoughts and feelings that we have.
Sure. Yep.
Right? The teaching of Vedanta says your real life is not that. Your real life is the Sat Chitananda, the life, light, and fullness that is God. That is your real life. And through wisdom, you can come to a realization that that is your real life, and then you can live that life as your life. But it's because the truth that's already here becomes evident.
Yep.
Okay, so
it's revealed through that.
It's revealed. Yeah, the whole purpose of the Vedanta teaching in the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita means the song of God. God singing to us. You see what I mean? So
nice.
The thing is that it's not non-dual knowledge is not me here, God over there, or whatever. It's me being drawn into the life, light, and fullness that is God as my life.
Mm, mm.
So it goes above the normal thinking. So for Swami Dayananda, you have Dharma, and when Dharma governs your striving for pleasure and security, you got no problems, have you? Because it's always in the light of what's harmful and what's not harmful and all of that stuff. It brings you into harmonious life.
Okay, yeah.
But he says that what's important though is this: when you start to live a harmonious life, you will neutralize the binding desires. So in other words, you grow out of the binding desires because you desire to live rightly. You don't desire, so it's not I'm now a good person, it's I'm now desiring to live rightly for living rightly.
Yeah.
Right? And then he
Yeah, it's
said,
good for its own sake, good for the sake of good.
good for the sake of good. And then he says that what you'll discover is what he calls a contemplative disposition. In other words, you have a disposition to be. You see, what we want to do is we want to find our real home, don't we?
Yeah.
A real home. Often some of us, we feel that we're a stranger in a strange land. And
Yeah, sure.
so we have the striving to find our real home. Our real home is the life, light, and fullness that is God. That is our real home. Right? Now that
Yeah.
longing, that longing for God is the fourth striving. It's the striving for being, but not as an object away from ourselves, but striving for being itself.
Mm.
And so he says that the purpose of karma yoga, which is the life of Dharma, he says the law or the life of objectivity, which we've talked about, is the purpose of it is to neutralize binding desires, grow out of binding desires so we no longer have a passionate concern with ourselves or the world. They call it dispassion.
Yeah.
And then we need to discover the difference between what's moving, what's temporary, and what is abidingly present. And they call it viveka,
Okay.
I think it is, the discrimination between the two. Then you
Yeah.
have a disposition to rest in or be being. He called it a contemplative disposition. So it becomes very meaningful to just simply sit with yourself quietly in the appreciation of being. And what's being? Being is also light, and it's also fullness.
Yeah.
And so the satisfaction of that longing for God is fullness itself, because we only strive for and long for God because we feel somewhat deficient, incomplete. The only thing
Yeah.
that satisfies that incompleteness is the discovery of God as our life. That's the fourth striving.
Yeah.
So you can see, can't you? You have all, that human life is striving. But the thing is that through wisdom, the striving for Dharma and the longing and the striving for God can become predominant through wisdom. But because wisdom reveals the good of Dharma, and it also reveals God as the ultimate good.
Right.
So when I appreciate God as the ultimate good and I appreciate Dharma, the more Dharma will move me.
Ultimate in the sense of it's the highest good. It's also the origin of all good, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
And you see, so when we're talking about the transformation of the human being, we're talking about the transformation of our mind through wisdom and our heart. Because the thing is that when we have an active striving for Dharma and an active striving towards God, we change as a person because the underlying psychodynamics have totally shifted. And that's why people can try as hard as they like to do self-improvement and all of this stuff. You know what I mean? At the level of security and pleasure, I'll become a nice person. I'm going to become my own person. I'm going to pursue my goals, and I'm going to make a wonderful world and all of that stuff, right? The
We
thing
can
is
make
that,
ourselves pretty busy. Won't be much peace, will there?
yes, but the first step of call is the first part of living a life of Dharma is seeing how we don't live a life of Dharma, recognizing when we're off course,
Oh, nice.
and then shifting.
Yeah.
A life of Dharma isn't self-idealism. I'm going to be a Dharmic, wonderful, nice person. A life of Dharma is the recognition I'm being unkind now, and then moving away from that unkindness in terms of refraining from dramatizing the unkindness.
Yeah.
And then that's an highly different thing. I am not doing it to become a nice person or a spiritual person. And this is what requires self-honesty, because when we look at our life, we know when we're unhappy. Is that true?
True. Yeah.
So what's the meaning of my unhappiness? Is that I'm not ultimately, particularly when we understand what Swami Dayananda means, resting in the lap of Ishvara or resting in the lap of God.
Usually I point the finger at the world or someone else.
That's right. But when we understand that the meaning of my happiness at any one moment is when I'm resting in God, when I'm actually being, when I am resting in the presence of God, what happens is, this is what Swami Dayananda calls resting in the lap of Ishvara. I find myself, first of all, being peaceful. I find, because there's no friction, I'm not fighting, right? So if you're ever in fighting, what do you know? The meaning of that fighting is that you've fallen away from that peacefulness. Is that true?
Right. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
If you feel your unhappiness is caused by external events, you've moved away from freedom. Whereas when you're just abiding in the presence of being, the fact is that you appreciate yourself being free, because you're not being determined by anything out there coming or going.
Yeah.
But the other most important thing is that we're going to go into this next time. We're going to go into this more, but I just wanted to say,
okay, good.
When we're feeling at home with ourselves because we're at home in God,
yeah,
self-dissatisfaction is gone.
Yeah.
So we need all of them. We need God, and we need Dharma. And ultimately, because without the understanding of what God is, and what I mean by what God is, not a theological concept, but what it is to live in the life of God, to rest in God. If we don't know what it's like to rest in God, we won't notice when we fall away. So see, Vedanta gives you new eyes to see the world. So when I find myself in any state that's unhappy, angry, upset, pissed off, it doesn't matter what it is, the meaning of that is not what I think it is normally. The meaning of it is I've fallen away from the lap of Ishvara. Because when I'm abiding in the lap of Ishvara, when I'm abiding there, when that's my place of habitation, I feel peaceful. I'm being free. So I'm being peaceful, I'm being free, and I'm being at home with myself. There's a completeness there in that. If I fall away from that, which I do, but now, as soon as I see it, I no longer look at it in the ordinary way. Oh, I'm pissed off because Joe said something. No. The meaning of my suffering is that I've fallen away from taking shelter in God.
Right. So let me see if I got this. You mentioned the four strivings.
Yep.
And that the psychology of the Gita is a psychology of binding desires or desires.
Yeah, but it's also just the psychology of desire in the sense of striving. Yep.
The positive sense.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. So the ordinary strivings are usually to be secure, stay alive,
Yep,
preventative kind of actions,
yep,
which shows a love of self of a kind, some
yep,
of which is
yep,
necessary, of course,
yep.
but it can go over the top. And then the second type of striving, which is also one of the ordinary strivings, is one of pleasure, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And it
Just
also
before we
comes with,
go on, just before we go on. So you got those two strivings when they're helping you negotiate your objective life and provide you with relative security and relative pleasure, right? They're very good.
so in our functional life, they're essential.
They're essential
But
for our functional life.
when they enter into our higher possibilities, then it messes it up.
No, they don't. Never know. No,
Because
it's
no,
when uh, they become wrapped up in egocentricity, love of self and love of the world. When they suddenly become misdirected, so they're no longer directed towards objective security and objective pleasure, but self-protection, self-love, self-involvement, and love of the world and various types of experiences, which is like when we're addicted to the world or emotionally dependent on the world, those strivings are still there, the striving of pleasure and the striving of security, but there's no dharma. And if there's no dharma, all you
so
have
would you say, okay, got it.
go.
Got it. So would you say they become troublesome if they're thought to be a replacement or if they're thought to bring the benefits of a dharmic life? Those
Well,
two lower strivings. If we keep pursuing them at a higher and higher level, trying to replace something that only a dharmic life can bring, then we're in trouble, right?
unless the striving for dharma comes alive in us through the discovery of its value, we can read as many books as we like or whatever, but there'll
Yeah.
be no shift in our heart. Our heart will be inhabited by binding desires. And the whole point of Vedanta is a transformation of the mind and the heart. We transform the mind through wisdom, and we transform the heart through discovery of what is truly good.
Yeah, it's not a self-help, self-improvement program to magnify the self.
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not.
Okay, so then they're the highest strivings you mentioned. One is for relative freedom and
Yep.
harmony. So the striving for Dharma, which
Yep.
is sort of loving use and the neighbor.
Yep.
A Dharmic life provides freedom. And there's
Yep.
an important component there that keeps us on track there or brings us back to it, which is regret and remorse.
Yep.
And then there's the final striving of the longing for God, which is the ultimate striving for the ultimate
Which
good.
Dayananda says ultimately that's is the ultimate striving and it covers all of them. So when we're striving, you see, without the longing for God, you'd never pack up your things and go to India and see a guru, would you?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, so
Yeah. Yeah.
so so what happens is that the striving for God will make us interested in examining ourselves honestly, trying to to reforming our conduct when it's not dharmic. All these things, all these things is the striving for the good. The problem is that when you're caught up in the lower striving without dharma and without the longing for God, all you have is egocentricity and love of the world. That's all you've got. And
Yeah.
so there's no possibility for spiritual cognition because the see, for Dayananda, the striving for dharma was God's presence in your life as dharma. So that striving, oh, that's not good. It's a wrong thing that I'm doing now. That perception is a lot different from, oh, I've said the wrong thing and now they're rejecting me.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference. They're different.
There's no self-concern in it. Yeah.
Well, one is self-concern. So but what I'm saying is the the striving for God, for example, was well put by Saint Augustine, I think, in our Christian tradition, and that says that my heart is restless until I rest in Thee. we kind of know what that means. There's a longing in our heart, and that longing can only be satisfied, and that longing comes from what we're longing for. The very longing, the spiritual aspiration comes from God. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
And that is the senior longing. But what's important though is that when we start to really see, and when I say really see, to see what's really good. When I'm arguing with you, I am not seeing what would be good to do. I'm not interested in the good. I'm interested in getting what I want.
Mm.
But without wisdom, what wisdom does is it opens our eyes to what is truly good. And in other words, a life of Dharma is truly good.
Yeah.
The life of God is absolutely good.
Supremely good, yeah.
So there's relative good, which is a lot higher than egocentric striving and stuff. There's relative good, and then there's absolute good. And
right.
And so, but it's not, this spiritual life has nothing. So when we're talking about transformation of the individual, when the individual is looking at his life through the light of Dharma, his cognition is higher than looking at the light of my egocentricity. When I awaken to the presence of God as a place where I find rest, that is, so where I'm just simply being, that is vastly different than trying to quieten my mind, because I think it's a good idea to do that.
Right. So a Dharma lesson 101 consists of learning about what that Dharma is, what that supreme good is, and then to examine my life to show to myself, really, I suppose, essentially, that I'm not living that kind of life.
Not the supreme good. Dharma isn't the supreme good. Dharma is a relative good, right? But because for the Hindus, you see this, they've got a thing called non-harmfulness. They consider it extremely important, which is a very interesting thing. Maybe we don't really know how to be good, but we know definitely what's bad, and we can stop that. So living a life of non-harmfulness lifts us out of being harmful. Does that make sense? And the only reason that it's valuable is that human beings normally, habitually harm themselves and other people.
Yeah, true.
And so Dharma opens up to a way of life where we go beyond harming ourselves and harming other people. So we then, when we do that, when the binding desires are no longer dictating how we see and how we act, we start to live in the world, but not in a harmful way. So the perception of our wrong acts is so very important.
Yeah, very good.
But the culmination, of course, is finding peace, the peace of God. Not my peace, the peace that is God. Not my freedom, the freedom that is God. Not my wisdom, the wisdom that is God. Because this is the whole point, that when my wisdom is the wisdom of God, that's a non-dual understanding of God, isn't it?
Yeah, right. True. Mm-hmm.
All right.
And that's a lifelong journey, right?
Absolutely. But
I keep falling away. I keep falling back into the old ruts, and being who I always have been. Yeah.
But the more we practice living our life in the light of Dharma, and the more contemplative we become, the better things get. We start to live a higher life, but it's got nothing to do with being a great person. However, you're less harmful, which is very good.
Yeah, excellent.
All right, Joe.
Great. Good on you, Bede. Thanks.
We'll see you next week. Bye bye.
See you then. Bye.